All right, I'm gonna level with you here. Teriyaki chicken and teriyaki beef, although they may be our absolute favorite ways of having teriyaki, are actually not very common in Japan. In fact, the only place you're likely to find teriyaki chicken in Japan is at McDonald's. Teriyaki beef, I think, is one of the best ways to actually make teriyaki. It may not be traditional, but it's still absolutely delicious. And I think the best way to do it is, rather than a kind of a stir fry with soy sauce flavors, get a really good cut of steak, cook it the way you like it, and just lightly glaze it in that teriyaki sauce. I've got here a lovely Wagyu sirloin. You don't have to use Wagyu, of course. Any of your favorite steaks would be fine, but I thought I'd show you guys something special. All we need, the meat, a couple of cloves of garlic, a bit of oil, of course, our homemade teriyaki sauce, and this is the most important thing that you could ever have when you're having a steak. All it is a plate that you can rest your steak on, because that is the most important part of cooking a steak, making sure that all of the juices have time to absorb and reabsorb into the steak, so you don't get that big pool of blood that comes out and around the steak whenever you cut into it. So I just want to slice this garlic now. And we just bring all of this over to our frying pan. Now, your teriyaki steak is just like cooking a steak, so all the things that go into cooking a steak are just as important for this. We've got things like using a nice heavy fry pan, a good seasoning of salt, and of course, having somewhere to rest it when it comes out of the pan. So let's get cooking. Heavy fry pan, high heat to start with. We can reduce the heat later. We'll just turn that on. Now, the normal way to approach cooking anything in a frying pan is to get the pan nice and hot before you get started. The only time I'm going to break that rule is for a dish like this, where I want to lightly toast this garlic at a low heat before I get my beef into the pan. Now, how to tell if your steak's done. This is the biggest point of cooking a steak. Don't listen to anyone who says 3 minutes on one side, 3 minutes on the other, because it doesn't mean anything. 3 minutes on this frying pan on this burner is completely different to 3 minutes on your frying pan on your burner. So the only way to check to see how your steak is done is to press it. Press it with your fingers, press it with your tongs, and you can feel it getting more firm the more it gets cooked. Wagyu is slightly different because you've got this really nice, thick marbling of fat through it. It'll actually get a bit softer first as that fat starts to render, but then it'll start to firm up again. So be careful of that if you're choosing Wagyu over, say, an Angus or something else, even with our teriyaki sauce. When you flip your steak, doesn't matter how many times you flip it, once, twice, however. With this one, you're gonna have to flip it a few times to get it nice and coated in that teriyaki glaze. You can see here, the more that glaze reduces and the more times I flip the steak through it, it's starting to get really nice and dark and glossy. And this is gonna taste really good on the outside of the steak. The only real complicating factor here, over and above cooking a normal steak, is you've gotta make sure that your steak is done to the way that you like it, at the same time that that teriyaki glaze is nice and reduced. And it's not as hard as it may seem, because all you've gotta do, if it starts to look a little bit too thick, is just add a little bit of extra glaze in there to kind of deglaze the pan, so to speak. So that's looking pretty good now. It's feeling pretty good too. So I'm going to take that out of the pan, let it rest. And while that's resting, I don't want to lose any of this. I'm going to create a bit of a sauce for myself in that. Just a little bit more of the teriyaki glaze into the pan with the heat off, so that we get a nice, thick, beefy teriyaki sauce we can pour over at the end. Now, a few more minutes for the steak to rest. Cut it, put it on a plate, and we are done.